when you work in pensions and investment, you need something maybe to stimulate ourselves in terms of how we're looking to bring about change in our sector, but what I'm going to share, I think, applies across all sectors with you. I'm sure your heads are buzzing. I've only been here today, and there's been some great presentations, and I'm sure you've had some great conversations, and you're probably thinking about tomorrow now already, about when you get back and you bump into your CEO or some of your senior colleagues, and they sort of say, well, what did you learn? Or what happened? Or what came out of it from today or the last 2 days of being with your peers across the sector? And I think there's a huge amount. It's really how you distill that down into a very short, crisp sort of reply, particularly if you're just in that lift conversation. I'm not going to talk about what though. I'm going to talk about, and it has come up, it came up this morning, about the how. About the how in terms of really how we bring about this opportunity around the world we're living in into organisations, particularly large organisations, and share with you the journey, the pain, and the experiences that we're going through in order to ensure that Standard Life is here, one of those 25% of companies in our sector is here in 5-10 years sort of time. And that's the purpose. But behind that, there's obviously to capture your imagination, but again, whether you want to use this, when you're in that lift conversation with your colleague, what we learnt about was about marriage. And whilst it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, it is actually a serious point as well. And we generally mean that. Mark, who's our CTO, CIO, I'm not actually married to him, but we do consider ourselves to be married. And I'll talk about, it was a couple of years ago we got married, and how that's been sort of since, and what's happened, and what that's brought for the organisation. One of let me just find my way around. Just in terms of context, I mean, there's a lot of talk about the world outside and how it's changing, and I quite like this sort of slide. This is, those of you who remember back to the 1970s, this is an IBM, the supercomputer, a Cray 1, which doesn't mean much to me as a marketeer, but I can't imagine marketeers and technologists getting together to talk about marriage around that, even though it's got leather seats, as you can probably sort of see. But of course, today we do share that common interest in sort of the technology, and hence what's happening out there does mean we are coming together in our respective sort of disciplines of technologists and sort of marketeers, not just in terms of what it does, but how it does it as well. And it's fascinating to see. I mean, obviously that contains as much as understand information as what that IBM supercomputer did back in the 1976. But times have sort of changed, as we all know. But as I say, it's not about outside, it's inside. And for me, the role of a CMO is not just about in terms of how you take the opportunities around technology into the outside market, but how you bring about change inside the organisation to make it effective. So there's 3 things I want to cover really with you about marriage. I'm going to come on to the home, the matrimonial home. I'll cover briefly the language, and then I'm going to talk about then what it's meant about living together in marital harmony, mostly, not always, and the friends and the family that were picked up along the way. And if I've got time, I'll finish off with our love child that's emerged really from this relationship, just to keep you in the room waiting for that sort of moment. So I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes or so, and then really hopefully it stimulates some sort of questions before we all sort of depart off. So let's just talk about the home. A lot already sort of covered about this in terms of sort of digital, but the blending together here of sort of the skills is the real sort of opportunity that we identified 3 years ago, and the bringing to sort of together. If we could see, because of as marketers, our interest in the technology that was emerging and growing and happening in other sectors, and the technologist, Mark, was sort of showing the opportunities of the world that was starting to emerge, we needed to get much closer together. And those wedding bells had to ring, and we had to commit. In the past, maybe I, as a CMO, would have been committed to the sales director. And that's who I'd be spending my time with. That's who I'd be on the dance floor with, even if we didn't actually get married, because there's always a bit of tension between ourselves and sales. This is a much more genuine relationship and a much more sustainable relationship, and that's where I think marriage does sort of come in. And of course, it sits very clearly if you have that shared purpose around the customer or the audience, the client. You realise the importance that sort of technology plays in terms of engagement. It drives that overall engagement. And I do agree with the point, I think maybe John sort of said it, you can't differentiate now between offline and online. All engagement now, in the way this digital marketing concept, it's irrelevant, it's all marketing now. And therefore, the technology is powering that engagement, and that's what we wanted to embrace. Even if the organisation itself was not recognising that the outside revolution that was taking sort of place around us. So we became bedfellows because we had that same conviction around what we were trying to do for our customers and believe in how technology could power that with all the new assets that were becoming more and more available sort of to us. And it did power. It really transformed. We have 4 million customers. In the past, most of those customers had never even heard from us, except from a bit of paper once a year with some technical jargon on some numbers. It didn't mean anything to the vast majority of people. So, and we're still in this journey, but we've transformed in terms of whether it's through our sort of digital, our mobile, sort of social. And when we talk about this, and whether it's me standing here or Mark, the CTO, we can both talk about it with the same passion that we did this together. It wasn't just I or the marketing team did this. It's very much a joint sort of effort. And that was important, really, in terms of that sign of commitment and that sign of actually we needed each other in order to deliver the assets that we now have available to our sort of customers. One of the key points to take away from this, and I could talk about this area a lot, but the one part I just wanted to leave you, what we didn't realise was the power the technology was giving us to co-create with customers on an iterative basis. And that has fueled increasingly the way that we developed. It's also changed the way we deliver technology. Rather than big projects, it's much more down into bite-sized chunks, proof of concepts, test and learn, get things wrong, and improve, and try better the next time. Because you're doing it with customers there and then. And we linked up particularly as a very successful example, True Office, who are a gamification company from New York, a very small business at the time. They've just been acquired last year by the New York Stock Exchange because they work across sectors to help us with our online journeys. But all the way through, we're involving customers on the journeys we now have available for customers who want now to use their pot that they've got for retirement from the age of 55 onwards. And you can do it all the way through online. But the co-creation bit was a key principle we wanted to embed in, and technology has allowed us to do that. Right, so from the matrimonial home, really, language is so key. And we all know in our organisation, even though we're part of one organisation, different functional areas can talk in a slightly different language, particularly marketeers at the one end and technologists at the other. So having that common language was quite, well, very important. But for us, though, it was the data, it was the common sort of language that we wanted to sort of come around. And the phrase that we started to use, that data was our oil. Now, oil is only useful if you actually put it to some use, but it was going to start to fuel our business. When I took over this role, prior to it myself, there wasn't actually anyone in Standard Life, just over 3 years ago, responsible for data. There was no clear owner. Other than finance data, there was no clear owner. So I took responsibility, got Mark alongside me in terms of helping me with the capabilities and realising what a really fragmented approach we had to our data, and we went on a clean-up exercise, which has been very painful, which has been quite sort of costly in many ways, but has been actually crucial to give us the foundations that actually data now can become our oil that goes into our engines to fuel our engagement and our interaction and servicing with our sort of customers. But probably more importantly, what we saw we could get to with that data is really then how we use it. And the saying that we built in, really, that actually if we can get to a stage, I wouldn't say we're necessarily there now, where that actually we know our customers so well that actually that we're not having to sell to them effectively. And that blending together of that really helped to kind of capture the organisation's imagination about the power of what data is. We're still in that process because it's much as a cultural change, really. But the insight that it gave us around seeing customers not just as traditional phrase policyholders or investors, but seeing them as human beings, and therefore how we want to engage with them as a human being, not just as someone who is saving money with us, was a big mindset shift, really, for our senior colleagues as well as our people on the front line. And that started to move as an organisation from being very left-brain, very functional, rational, logical, very actuarial-based, to be much more recognise the importance of the right side of the brain, creative and intuitive, and that engagement sort of part. to do that, there's a journey, and it's a bit of a heavy sort of slide, but it is a journey we're on, and it is a tough journey when you want to build in the role of analytics into the organisation. And we break it down in terms of the various sort of stages I've got there to where we want to get to. Optimise at the moment, I'd say we're in transition. Optimise is the ultimate. Again, it's various sort of stages, and each of these go at different sort of speeds at different sort of time, down to prioritisation, but also the capability or the bandwidth of the organisation to bring about processes or people sort of changes. You can see that we've got the marriage commitment there that happened in that sort of transition sort of around sort of data. The reason we were married earlier, but we had to bring another member into the family at that sort of point last year, really, if we were going to get traction. And that member of the family really had to bring alongside us was the CFO to make sure we were much tighter. I know in this country you can't get married to two people, but anyway, he had to somehow be part of the family, even though we weren't married to him, and bring him into the loop about what we were trying to achieve and the power of analytics and where we want to take it. Technology was obviously an underpin, and the point made earlier, it's not one solution that's allowed us on that. The proof of concepts and testing out different suppliers around this has helped us sort of move things sort of forward with different audiences as well. For us, we had that perennial sort of question is, should there be a centre of analytics, or should it actually be sort of spread into the various functional areas? Where we've got to is analytics all sits with me in marketing, just to give it that traction and that sort of push. And we've particularly focused on our customer audiences, but we've had the progress on that now. We're starting to push it out into our business areas as well, into our business-to-business areas, and even into our people function. And into our servicing area at the same sort of time. So in order to get it moved, you need to have that kind of sort of tight-knit sort of team, particularly if you're bringing in outside sort of skills, the data scientists that we've recruited last year, into an area really where they feel actually they can test and learn and be protected really from the whole sort of the governance of the whole organisation. And I don't think it really sort of matters too much, because at the end of the day, in our view, the analytics area that we've created will become, effectively, we call it the brain of the organisation. It will drive decision in whatever happens across the business in 2 or 3 years sort of time, is our hope. And that won't necessarily sit with the CMO. I'm not too sure a CMO role will exist in a few years' time, but there'll certainly be a CAO, a Chief Analytics Officer, which will probably even replace the role of the CFO. That's our view about the way that we'll start to transform, and the importance of the brain, for want of a better phrase, sitting at and driving all decisions that we make at a senior level, but also in terms of the front line as the organisation. It is a journey, as we all know, and probably we have moved on from actually just in the past just having data in terms of reporting to saying what's happening onto the predictive sort of side and then to the decisioning. We can only do it in pockets, and this is the thing we've learned. The organisation takes a while really to actually understand how it can use this and use it in a powerful way to change really how we engage with customers, but also our processes and the way that we service at the same sort of time, as well as in terms of where we prioritise our strategy. So this is where we've set ourselves to get onto much more prescriptive approach, and much more in terms of predicting customer behaviour. We can do it in pockets, but we can't do it across all of our 4 million sort of customers. And we focus on there where the greatest value is. Those customers, for example, have a higher propensity to leave us. If we can predict that and intervene at the right sort of time and engage with them, then obviously we can demonstrate the value of that high retention and then the value that comes from that over sort of time. I've scanted through those. That's because I wanted to get onto the main sort of point, really, to then living together in sort of the and what that sort of meant for us and how we've gone about that. At the start, I suppose when you do get married, you make those vows and you have that joint sort of commitment. You need to sort of come together. I know I've included there. And therefore, we wanted that shared goal. It wasn't about just bringing in the best technology. It wasn't just about having the best creative marketing. It was around the purpose of the organisation, about how we help people around their savings for the longer term, for their future sort of needs, and understand that. But going beyond that, it's all well and good having that at the C-suite level, at our level, but actually that needs to be actually felt by people on the ground, and that's what they believe. That's what they believe they're doing. And to do that, actually, and they share that with a common language, you need to put people together. And that cross-functional teams was actually quite a challenge initially, and there was some resistance. Very keen to get the marketing and the technologists together. That happened, but the reluctance of our risk people, our finance people, our operations people to sit in the same area 3 years ago was hard. And even if you got them there, the next day they had gone back to where they came from. So it took sort of time, and only now are we starting to see this impact where actually we're breaking down the traditional silos that existed in Standard Life maybe for 190 years. So people are now sitting together. Shared space is just as important in my view, because it's a physical representation that you're all around behind that shared goals and shared what you're trying to achieve together around the customer. What's fascinating as well, the technologists in particular love that engagement on a co-creation basis with customers. They love actually, whether it's online or whether it's actually going out to in this, or we do sort of guerrilla activities out to customers and go and talk to them, take the technologists with you. And they love that engagement rather than being left to the marketeers, and have this sort of saying that marketing is far too important just to be left to the marketing people. It needs to be everybody involved in that if you're going to get the right sort of solution and outcomes for customer. So we made that cross-functional love. We got people together. Mark and I have sat together closely with our sort of desk over the last sort of 3 years, and the power of that is, in itself has been challenging for me because he loves Star Trek, and I've never seen Star Trek, and that's what he talks about a lot of the time. But we do have a common interest in punk music, so we do have some outside interests that we share. What this then started to do is change the organisational design, challenge the organisational design of Standard Life. Because our HR team sort of said, well, no, what are you calling people? Or what's the name of this? And we've put aside the names, it's around what we're trying to achieve. Spotify for us, and we were pointed in the direction of Spotify to learn from them. We spent some time with them and understanding their operating model, which they share very publicly. And there's this much more agile, iterative, customer design-led sort of approach, really. We haven't been able to replicate that approach yet, but certainly we've got pockets that are moving that way. And more of our teams, we've not kept the teams that have been working this way secret. We've made it very sort of public, and invite people to come in and see how people are working and let them actually control the environment, and even break down some of the rules that have existed about teams weren't allowed to have their own flowers or plant pots in case someone bit a tulip and ate it. So we've allowed people actually to break the rules. Even from a closed point of view, the Standard Life policy was suited and booted. And we didn't seek permission from our HR colleagues. The team came to us and said, really, if we're recruiting these people from outside ourselves, can't we just dress what we think is appropriate? So we said, yeah, go and do it. Caused a bit of consternation, caused a bit of issue across the rest of the organisation, but now the whole organisation, a year later, adopted a dress as appropriate policy, where people do come in their jeans or whatever they feel is appropriate for in terms of the work they're sort of doing. And there's quite a few rules we've had to break in order to challenge the organisation the way it sort of worked. We've had our wrists slapped a few times, but it's been worth it. It has been sort of touched on in terms of then moving from the traditional way of actually the way you deliver solutions through to your audience or to your customers in terms of this much more agile progression over perfection, customer creation, fail fast, learn, and design-led approach, really. And that's the ethos that we've tried to stay sort of true to, and given the confidence to the team and the empowerment for them to do that. And they've adopted a phrase also of, if they're going to be empowered, they should be making the decisions. Show us the results, show us in terms of what is working, what's not, but don't come to us for the decisions. So they coined a phrase called, let's not do HIPPO. HIPPO stands for highest income person's point of view. Normally, everything is driven from the person who's paid the most or the most senior person in the room. Actually, no, they're the furthest removed, actually, from the co-creation, from the customer, from actually what's happening. It should be actually down to those at much more local level. Some people refer to that as subsidiarity. But that's what's given the team sort of confidence, actually, to push on much more aggressively than we thought, actually, they would initially because of that fairly risk-averse environment that we've worked in over the last few decades. What has helped that environment and that sort of culture is by working with third parties. Certainly we've brought in some new people to be employed by Standard Life from outside of financial services to challenge our thinking, which I think you need to do if you're working in analytics and digital and insight and experience. But then started to work with different, I've mentioned True Office, who are up there in the top right. Some of these are very much marketing orientated. Comet is an organisation where their team actually sits alongside our office, our people in the office itself, and work alongside, because we don't have all the skills. We need that knowledge transfer as we build in analytics into the business. Alliance Creative is a group of freelancers in Edinburgh that actually give us that opportunity to flex up and down in terms of depending on the demands that we get through sort of time. But the key here is the third parties, the parties we work with, are challenging our thinking. We use them to help us act as catalysts in terms of the change and challenge our own people and our conventional thinking. And they change over time because you need that new insight. But they're large and small organisations, and that's been enormously helpful. One of the outcomes of that technology has given us has allowed us really to start to free up our people, particularly our marketing people, in terms of some of the business as usual work we do. We have to do a huge amount of work in terms of communication at scale because we run all these large pension schemes across the country. So there's a huge amount of communication. So over time, we've used technology to automate that and therefore free up the time of our marketing people to spend time on creative activity. And we've used that time they've freed up. There's a whole team of them. I've freed up 20% of their time. And I'm using that not to reduce their numbers, but actually then to use that to offer creative services to large employers and other organisations that we charge for. And through that, that's how we've created a new startup business within Standard Life called 56 Degrees, which is a marketing, communication, creative services company that charges a fee to the likes of BT, Heineken, IBM for offering additional creative services that we can offer to them as an organisation for their employees. We could only do that through technology. And what that has done, therefore, is create a kind of a startup mentality with this type of business within the organisation. And it's a form of disruption because effectively what 56 Degrees will become over time is Standard Life's marketing area completely, and therefore not be seen as a cost but seen as a value add. And our ultimate aim is actually the fees that we generate, which are never going to push Standard Life share price up by 50p or anything, but will cover our cost and also therefore demonstrate the value that we bring. That could only be done by technology. So that's just one example in which we're changing the way that we work and also changing people's sort of mindsets, the way that we operate. All of that couldn't have happened, whether it was 56 Degrees or the digital developments or the application of analytics, if we hadn't put it in the outset some measures. And this was a challenge initially about moving the measures around from the pure financial measures we had, which is about how much in savings are we attracting in, how much is going out, and how much revenue, how much of a charge do we take off those savings that we accumulate over time. And moving the metrics much more broader that are reported into our executive meeting to be much more around the customer, whether it's in terms of a brand level, in terms of NPS, or whether it's in terms of those engagement levels that experience NetEasy or CSAT or whatever, bringing those into the scorecard that we review every month. And now at our monthly executive meeting, the first item, standing item on the agenda is what we call voice of the customer, voice of the employer, voice of the advisor, using these metrics. Rather than historically where we've jumped straight to the financials. Again, technology is allowing us to do that. The analytics is fueling that, and therefore, over time, it starts to bring in, we would like to feel, a data-driven business, but also an analytical culture, which I think may be one of the subjects that have been covered over the conference, which is really the ultimate aim. Everyone sees the value of the analytics and the role it plays. So in short, very briefly, there's the home, there's the language, and that's what it's about, living together. Mark and I are still great sort of friends. We have different friends, but we come together as one on a regular sort of basis. We respect each other. We value our sort of differences. We have our arguments and our tiffs, but we know we need each other. That's the most important thing, and that's why we refer to it as a marriage. Thank you.